It all began with a simple massage, a seemingly insignificant gesture. Or so I thought. What my neighbor did while my husband, Thaddeus, was at work changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. How did I end up here? You'll never guess what happened next. Stay until the end because the truth is more shocking than you can imagine. I was alone, as usual. Thaddeus worked late, too late. By the time he got home, he was exhausted, barely able to exchange a few words before collapsing into sleep. I had learned to cope with that solitude, but that night, something was different. A heavy fatigue invaded me, accompanied by a sharp pain in my back. That's when Orion, my neighbor, appeared. He was leaning on the railing of his balcony, a drink in hand, looking relaxed. Orion was always that guy, always smiling, always attentive. We often exchanged a few words, simple neighborly chats, nothing more. "You look exhausted, Isolde," he said, his voice carrying over the quiet evening air. I sighed. "I carried too many bags today. My back is killing me." He smiled. "If you want, I can help. I learned some massage techniques when I practiced boxing. It might relieve the tension." I hesitated for just a moment. After all, it was just a massage, a simple act of kindness. "Why not?" I said, inviting him into my house as I had done several times before. But this time, it felt different. He asked me to sit on the sofa. His hands were warm and firm as he began gently massaging my shoulders, pressing exactly where it hurt. I closed my eyes. "You're completely tense, Isolde. You should learn to relax," he said softly. "I know," I sighed, feeling his fingers find the knots of tension and expertly unwind them. It felt good, too good. Then his hands moved a little lower. At first, it was subtle, following the curve of my shoulder blades, then down to the small of my back. His touch changed, sending a shiver down my spine. Was it just my imagination, or was it real? "Feels good, doesn't it?" he asked, his voice low and steadied. I opened my eyes to find him staring at me, waiting for a response. I should have said no. I should have stood up and walked away. But I stayed, and that night, everything changed. The next day, I woke up with a strange feeling, as if something inside me had shifted, changed, without my fully understanding what it was. And yet, nothing had happened. I had only let Orion give me a massage. Perhaps for too long, perhaps in a way that went beyond what it should have been. But it was just a massage, a simple moment of relaxation. So why did that memory burn my skin? Why did my heart race every time I relived the sensation of his hands on me? I tried to push those thoughts away, to return to normalcy. I cleaned the house, prepared dinner for Thaddeus, and when he came home, I pretended everything was fine. But I couldn't look him directly in the eyes. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Orion. "Hope your back is feeling better. If you want, I can do it again." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Why did a simple message affect me so much? My fingers trembled as I typed a response. "It's better, thanks." He replied almost instantly. "Anytime you need something, I'm here." Those words resonated within me much more than they should have. I'm here. How long had it been since someone said that to me? When night fell, Thaddeus came home late as usual. He served himself a plate, ate in silence, and then collapsed on the sofa, exhausted. I wanted to talk to him, to tell him I felt lonely, that I needed him. But looking at him, something inside me closed off. He worked hard for us, for our future. What right did I have to complain? So, instead of talking to my husband, I took my phone and typed a message to Orion. "Are you still awake?" 1 second, 2 seconds, and his response appeared. "Always for you." That's where it all truly began. That night, I couldn't sleep. Orion's message played over and over in my mind. "Always for you." Why did those words have such power over me? He was just a neighbor, nothing more. So why did I feel this uncontrollable need to respond to him, to see him by my side? Thaddeus slept deeply, his back turned to me as always, his breathing calm and distant. He was there, but also so absent. My heart was beating too fast. "Are you outside?" I texted. Seconds later, his response came. "Yes. Want to come out for some air?" I knew I shouldn't do it, that this sudden impulse to talk to him, to seek him out, was a dangerous path. But I ignored that voice in my head. Quietly, I grabbed a sweater and opened the door. The cool night air enveloped me, a soothing caress on my heated skin. And there he was, Orion, leaning against his car, arms crossed, a lopsided smile on his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his penetrating gaze fixed on me. I shook my head, unable to speak. "Me neither," he added, straightening up. "You still look tense. Want me to help again?" I held my breath. In that instant, I knew nothing would ever be the same. His tone was light, almost innocent, but his eyes said something else. I laughed nervously. "I think I might get addicted to your massages." He smiled, and that smile made me shiver. "Then come here." He extended his hand, and I took a step too close. I could smell his cologne, feel his breath, everything was just inches away. My heart raced at a frantic pace. He placed his hands on my shoulders, the same warmth, the same sensation as before, but this time, it was no longer innocent. His fingers slid slowly, exploring every inch of my skin as if testing my limits. I knew I should pull away, tell him to stop, but when his hands moved a little lower, I didn't move. And in that unsettling silence, something irreversible had begun. My breath was ragged, his hands still on me, soft but firm. He knew exactly what he was doing. I should have stepped back, told him to stop, but I stayed still. "Isolde," he whispered, his deep voice resonating in the night air. He didn't look away, his eyes shining with an intensity one hadn't seen in Thaddeus for a long time. I bit my lip. It was too much, too intense, too risky. "We shouldn't," I murmured, the words barely audible. Orion smiled, a smile that said he knew. His hands loosened their grip slightly, but he remained too close. His cologne disoriented me, his breath brushing against my skin. "Then why are you here, Isolde?" he asked softly. I looked down, ashamed. Why was I there? Why, in the middle of the night, had I felt the need to see him, to talk to him, to feel his hands on me? I should have left, run away, but instead I stayed. He reached out and gently cupped my cheek, his gesture slow and controlled. I shivered. "If you want me to stop, just say so," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was a trap, and I was falling headfirst into it. My lips parted, the words ready to escape, but nothing came out. Not a single sound. Orion waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, then smiled again. "See," he said, and before I could process it, he leaned in. His lips brushed against mine, a tease, just enough to make me lose control. It was me. I was the one who closed the distance, who closed my eyes, forgetting Thaddeus, forgetting everything else. I let myself be carried away by the forbidden, by that sensation I thought I had lost long ago. And in that stolen moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. When my lips touched his, an electric shock ran through my entire body. It wasn't just a kiss, it was so much more. It was everything I had repressed, everything I had kept inside me for months, exploding all at once. Orion didn't hesitate. His arms pulled me toward him with a gentle but irresistible force, his body hot against mine, his hands slowly exploring my back. Every gesture was a temptation, and I should have pulled away, stopped this madness, but instead, I responded to his kiss with the same intensity, the same urgency. Out there, under the moonlight, I was no longer Thaddeus's wife. I was just a woman who felt alive. Orion broke the kiss and locked his gaze with mine. He wanted to know how far I was willing to go. "Should we stop here, Isolde, or not?" His voice was husky, trembling. He was struggling as much as I was. I swallowed hard, unable to speak because I didn't know what to say. I knew that if I took one more step, there would be no turning back, but the truth was, I had already taken that step. "Come with me," he whispered, gently taking my hand. I felt my heart explode in my chest. It was the moment of choice. I could regain my senses and return to Thaddeus, to that dull and monotonous life, or I could let this flame consume me. And without thinking too much, I let Orion lead me with him. I knew it was wrong, but in that precise moment, I didn't care. I followed him without hesitation, as if drawn by a powerful magnet. My heart pounded, my hands were sweaty, and yet I had never felt so exhilarated. He guided me into his house. As soon as the door closed behind us, a heavy silence fell. He turned to face me. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My throat was dry, my thoughts a chaotic mess, but my body knew exactly what it wanted. I nodded slowly, the only response he needed. In a fraction of a second, he closed the distance between us. His warm hand slid behind my neck, his hot breath against my skin, and this time, I didn't hesitate. Our kisses became more intense, more hungry, each stolen second a step further into the forbidden. His fingers explored my skin as if he wanted to memorize every inch of it. I closed my eyes, surrendering completely to that dizzying sensation, but just as I was letting go, something shattered that unreal moment. Ding dong. The doorbell rang, jarring us both. Who could that be at this hour? I whispered, my breath ragged. Orion's expression hardened. He glanced quickly at the clock on the wall, 2:14 a.m. I have no idea. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. My stomach knotted. What if it was Thaddeus? I rushed to the window and slightly parted the curtain. My blood ran cold. There, at the door, stood Thaddeus. My heart nearly exploded at the sight of him, just inches away. I stepped back, breathless. It was over. I was lost. Isolde, calm down, Orion whispered urgently. Calm down? How could I stay calm when my husband was on the other side of that door? Ding dong. The doorbell rang again, louder this time. Isolde, open up. I know you're in there, Thaddeus called out, his voice tense and suspicious. I jumped, my heart pounding. Orion clenched his jaw, understanding the situation instantly. He knows, he said grimly. The silence became unbearable. I had two choices, hide and hope he would go away or face the inevitable. But deep down, I knew it was over. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door, my hands trembling as I turned the knob and opened it slowly. Thaddeus stood there, motionless in the doorway, his dark gaze fixed on me. He didn't need to ask questions. In an instant, he understood everything. My cheeks were still flushed, my breath ragged, my hair disheveled. Everything spoke for itself. Then his gaze shifted behind me, and he saw Orion. A heavy silence fell over us like a leaden weight, a second suspended, heavy and suffocating. And then the explosion. Is this a joke, Isolde? Thaddeus's voice vibrated with rage. My heart raced. There were no excuses, nothing that could erase what had just happened. Thaddeus stepped forward, his body tense, his fists clenched. Orion instinctively positioned himself in front of me. Thaddeus, listen, Orion began, but he didn't get to finish. Thaddeus's fist connected with his jaw, the dull thud of the impact echoing in the room. Orion staggered but quickly steadied himself, ready to fight. Stop. I pleaded, terrified, but Thaddeus was beyond listening. His eyes burned with a pain I had never seen in him before. Do you think I'm blind, Isolde? That I didn't see what was happening right in front of my eyes, he growled. I tried to speak, but no words came out. He shook his head as if suddenly comprehending the magnitude of the chasm that had opened between us. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. The walls shook, and the silence that followed was deafening. My legs gave way beneath me. I had lost everything, and the worst part was, I had allowed it to happen. Orion looked at me, his expression a mix of concern and regret. Isolde, he began, but I cut him off. You should go, I said, my voice hollow. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. I was alone, the weight of my actions crushing me. I had betrayed Thaddeus, betrayed our marriage, and for what? A moment of passion that had destroyed everything. The moral of the story is that the forbidden attracts us not for what it is, but for what it awakens within us, a void, a lack, a frustration. However, every choice has a consequence. Nothing solid can be built on lies, and the thrill of a moment is never worth the pain of betrayal. If you ever feel a void in your relationship, talk about it before it's too late. before the irreparable happens. Share this story if you think it can make someone reflect. Because sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that teach us the most.